Hey friends, Angela here with Love God Greatly. We are starting week 2 of our God With Us study. I'm so excited to be joining you with you guys, and I wanted to wish you all a happy and Merry Christmas. Today we're talking about obedience and how Jesus said that he came to do his Father's will. He lived a life of obedience. And not only did Jesus live a life of obedience, but when we're looking at this amazing Christmas story, we see so many individuals in this story choosing to live a life of obedience. And I feel like in our world, especially in America, in our culture, we feel like if we are truly in God's will and we're living a life of obedience, then we are living with prosperity, we're living with blessing, and all these wonderful things are happening. And when we really take that view and we apply it to the Christmas story, that isn't always the case. We can be in the center of God's will, and it isn't always easy. And it doesn't always feel like a blessing, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about today, where it talks about, first off, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9, Jesus says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich." Jesus chose to leave heaven and all the richness and everything. We can't even imagine what heaven is like, but he chose to leave heaven and become poor for our sake, so that we can have the hope of heaven, so that we can have the riches of heaven and have eternity with him. He left heaven so that we can gain heaven. And then also in John chapter 6, verse 38, it says, "For I've come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." Jesus came to do God's will. And we know that God's will ended up meaning Calvary. It ended up meaning dying on the cross. And so that's what I wanted when I was looking at those verses, and I was looking at, inside, the Christmas story and what that means. When Mary walked a life of obedience, did that mean that Mary's life was always easy? Did it mean that she was without pain and hurt and misunderstanding? No. Actually, being in God's will meant that people would misunderstand her, that people would judge her, that people would gossip about her, because they didn't understand. They didn't understand the truth that she knew, and that what God was doing in her and through her, this amazing story of redeeming the world, and he chose her. Of all the young girls of the world, he chose her. And yet, because he chose her, it meant that in some areas of her life that she walked through really hard, painful times. I mean, we can't imagine watching our own children be crucified. I mean, we can't even comprehend that. And yet, she had to go through that. And that was part of God's will. And so just taking this information and these verses and looking at the Christmas story, I want to encourage you guys that those of you, when you're walking in obedience and maybe you're hurting, you're in pain, maybe people aren't understanding the choices that you're making, but you know that you're in God's will. God's confirming it to you through his word. I want to encourage you. Keep on. Be strong. Realize that so many Christians in the Bible, in the Christmas story, even nowadays, are in God's will, and it's not easy. And I feel like sometimes the world says, well, if you're in God's will, it's going to be a will of blessing and prosperity and all these wonderful things. And if this isn't happening to you, then you're not in God's will. And I want to push back against that and say, no, you can be in God's will and things not be easy and people not understand. And so I want to encourage you guys with that today. And so I want us just this week just to really be thinking about our lives. And as you're reading today's verses, as you're reading the rest of this week, just pray about God's will for your life and your walk of obedience. And maybe there's something in your life, an area of your life that maybe he's starting to tug at your heart. And maybe you haven't surrendered this area of your life to him, or maybe there's an area of your life that you need to walk in obedience. My challenge for us this week is to really think about it and pray about it. And if God reveals an area of our life that we need to surrender to him, my challenge is to write that down and to put it in a box and to wrap it up. And then on Christmas morning, maybe it's just between you and God, or maybe you want to do it in front of your family and give God that present and open it up and say, Lord, in 2017, I'm committing to you to walk in obedience in this area. So I'm just excited to see what God's doing through our lives. I just want to love on you and encourage you just to keep focusing on Him, and just be encouraged by His Word. Be encouraged that if you are walking through a hard time right now and you are walking in obedience and it's not easy and you're hurting, I want to encourage you that God knows and He understands. And so many people in the Bible have walked a similar path. And I just want to encourage you to stay strong and to be brave and to just lean into Him and just go to Him for love and for comfort. And just know that you are loved and you're not alone in this journey. So thanks so much for joining us. And until next time, love God greatly. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.